it's funny because when you mention the word submission, everybody cringes, all right? And people don't like that word very much. But there are 6 things that I have taught in marriage seminars. And when I do a whole day of seminars, I teach on 6 things. And the 6 things I often teach about, the first one is the purpose of marriage and the principle that one probably you probably already know. And it's all about marriage that refines faith. Marriage itself, believe it or not, actually makes you more Christ-like. I've learned that in the last 40, coming up to 41 years today. And it produces within us what we need to become more like Christ. So that's very important. The second thing I often teach on, and maybe none of you have heard of this before, it's called the praxis principle. And the praxis principle is very simply about applying what we know and evaluating our outcomes and adjusting our understanding. We're not going to look at any of these today, but I just wanted to give you a brief understanding of the reasons, the things that I often talk about in marriage. The third thing is love language, the principle of love language. And the fourth thing is often the apology principle, which we're not very good at, especially us men. We're not very good at the apology principle. And my wife keeps telling me that. And the fifth thing is the golden rule of communication, which is to do with better listening. Sometimes we have selective hearing, and we listen to what we want to listen to, and we won't listen to the things we won't listen to. Some of you, especially the women, are smiling at the men in regards to that as well. And the sixth principle is the truth, speaking the truth in love principle as well. But the one I want to talk about today, as you know, is the seventh one. Now, the seventh one is one that I wrote specially for this today. So you're getting this firsthand. So I had to dig deep in my Bible. I had to pray about these things. The notes will be sent to you as well. And but there are 3 questions that I want to ask in terms of submission. The first one is, what is submission? It's probably not what you think it is, not biblically anyway. Number 2 is, what is the principle? What are the principles of submission? So it's what is submission and what are the principles of submission. And there are several principles of submission, and we're just going to have a look at 2 of those principles today of submission. So we want to look at those things. And number 3 is, why should a person submit to someone else? Why should we submit to each other? Why should we do that? There's no reason for us to really do that. Yet, biblically, we're told to do that, and the reasons for it. So let's start with the first question. What is submission? Well, the word submission is translated from the Greek word called hupotasio. I love this word, okay? It's a compound word. Now, by now, some of you should already know what a compound word is. A compound word is made out of 2 words or more. And in this case, it's made up of 2 words, and it's made of hupa, which means under, and tasso, which is to place. So in other words, what it means is to place under. All right, are you with me? Okay. So when we hear the word submission, it is to place under. Now, if I said to you, do you like that word? When we hear that word submission, and we say to ourselves, I am going to be placed under somebody else. In other words, in the Bible, there is always, wherever you go in the scriptures, there is always a chain of command. Whether we like it or whether we don't like it, there is always a chain of command. And when you combine these 2 words, which literally means placed under, hupotasio, we're going to look at that a lot today, hupotasio. It means something different in the terms of context, biblical context. So if we're talking about authority, it means one person is under the authority of another person. And sometimes that makes us cringe, right? But it's the way God put things in place. Right from the beginning, right in the beginning of Genesis chapter 1, all the way through to Revelations, through the crimson thread, he put those things in place. In other words, one person is in charge and the others do what he says. Now that's sometimes You know, we know that because of the hierarchy of management in work these days. So there's submission to him or to her. It's a boss or a male or a female. Two equal partners making a decision or having to choose between several options. It means that one person is deferring to the other person. In other words, they're delegating something to the other person. In other words, one person is letting the other make the decision or the choice. But regardless of the context, submission always involves hierarchy. You can never, ever change that. There is a reason for it. And I'm going to give you some examples. I've just to let you know, I've let my wife proofread this. So, you know, so she's read this, okay? And so she's looked at the examples and the context of some of the stories I'm going to tell you as well. So that making sure that she agrees with what I'm saying online as well. Someone's making a decision or a choice, and others are deferring that to a person. So here's a layman's definition of submission from a biblical perspective. If you're taking notes, you need to write this down, okay? Submission is allowing someone else to make a decision or a choice. Submission is allowing someone else to decide or choose or decide or choose something. So submission is allowing someone else to decide or choose something or making a choice. So let me tell you, that goes against human nature. Not many people like other people making choices for us. But in the long run, sometimes it's very good for other people to make choices. And I'll give you some real marriage examples after 41 years of that in a moment. Now, no one wants others deciding for us or choosing something without our input, right? Do we agree on that? Okay. But now let me give you some examples. Right. Now, whenever Giovanna and I go to visit our grandkids, we usually eat out. But someone's got to decide what places we're going to go to, all right? And many times we're with our grandkids, but someone has got to make that choice. Now, I often am at the end of the food chain when it comes to making the choices for my grandkids, all right? It's either done by my daughter, it's either done by my son, or it's done by my wife. And the reason why, or even though I am the patriarch of the family, even though I'm going to pay for it, do you know what I mean? All right? But I'm still at the end of the decision line here. And I'm even going to foot the bill, you know. But the decision often that is made is that the grandkids make the choices, you know. In one sense, they are the boss, you know. I mean, if my daughter isn't around, my grandkids can have ice cream for breakfast. You know what I mean? But, you know, I didn't do that with my kids, but I do it with my grandkids, you know. They are the boss, you know. So whatever happens with my grandkids, I don't let my daughter or son know what's happening. But they get away with a lot of things, you know. Because it's not about me, it's not about Giovanna, it's about spending time with my children, okay? So I defer to them. I let them make the choice. And people, that's what submission is all about. It's about allowing, write this down because this is very important. People think it's overlording somebody. It's not. It's letting other people make the right choices for you. I'm placing what I want under what they want. And that's the Greek word, which means my wife, my grandchildren, my children make the choice. But I'm allowing that to happen, okay? And that is the true definition, biblical definition for submission. Now I'm placing what I want under what they want. So I'm deferring to them. So there are many times as a husband, as a patriarch to the family, and also equally the father and the grandfather. Biblical perspective, I've always made them and helped them make their choices for them. That is my position. We're going to go a bit deeper into this and you'll see why. So we're going to make a lot of applications because some of you men need to understand what I'm teaching this morning, especially the men, okay? And the women said, okay, all right. When it comes to shopping for furniture, my taste is completely different to Giovanna. all right? And we don't argue, but I've got completely different tastes. In fact, when I pick something, some of you won't get this joke, but she calls me Del Boy, all right? Some of you will get this joke, but some of you won't get that joke. But in fact, what she's saying, you've got really bad taste, all right? But she won't, it's a subliminal message that comes to me, all right? So in fact, what I like is that she usually laughs at the taste or the things that I decide I want to make in terms of buying furniture. But the funniest thing about all this is that whenever I go into a shop, it's really funny because everybody goes to my wife and not me. I don't know what it is, but they kind of aim, whether she's a soft touch, but I still have to pay for it. Do you know what I mean? And so even though we share the money, I still have to pay for it. So that's very important as well. So you would think that I would have a final decision when it comes to choosing furniture, right? No, right? You would be wrong, because when it comes to furniture, the color, the style, and everything, it's Giovanna's choice. And I'm happy with that. I'm happy with what decides. I may chip in here and there, but I don't really care, to be honest with you. It's not a priority in my life. But it's a priority in her life that she wants everything to look good as well. In fact, there is a hierarchy. Can you see there's a hierarchy involved when it comes to buying furniture? What Giovanna wants ranks higher than what I want. But I defer that submission to her. This is biblical submission. That is, and simply because I don't have much interest in furniture, to be honest with you. And I don't have much interest in that much about what color she wants to paint the walls and put curtains up. I'm happy she can go ahead and do all those kind of things. We're a strange couple. She does all the DIY. I do all the cooking, you know. So we're kind of strange like that. But we enjoy what we do, so we work very well together. In fact, if we go to a charity store and buy furniture, we'll walk in, and like I said, it's just that the person will go straight to her rather than me. I don't know whether because we've been there several times, and the person knows that I'm a waste of time, all right? And it's best to refer to Giovanna, okay? But I can promise you, we're going to get what I want. We're going to get what I want some of the time, but not all the time, and that's very important as well. Just thinking about hierarchy, and people don't like that word, but it's there, it's in the Bible. I think it goes like Giovanna first, the grandkids second, then my kids, and then me, when it comes to decision making, all right? So they're kind of the boss, but I don't mind on certain things where they can go in. Now, for example, if we were going to a restaurant, right? Or we're going somewhere to eat, the first thing my grandkids would want is they would want to go to McDonald's, all right? I'm not particularly keen on McDonald's, I'll be honest with you. The only thing that's good is the fish. Sometimes they do fish, and it's good. But they like the greasy chips and the burgers and all this kind of stuff, you know. But I'm not keen on that. But it becomes their decision, all right? And because I'm the benevolent father, I'm supposed to be the good husband, and I end up being, and this is what men should end up being biblically, is the most submissive in their family. Are you hearing me? All right, okay. Now it's true. I'll explain that why it's true, and I'll explain it why it's biblical. In fact, it's biblical for a loving father and a benevolent husband to be more submissive than anyone else in the family. In fact, when I was growing, when I became a father at the age of 20, very early in my age, and all I wanted to do is provide for the family. That was my goal, and all I wanted to make sure the bills were paid, everything was paid, and it was my duty for that to happen. I often say the man looks after the house, the woman looks after the home. You can write that down, all right? She makes the home, whichever way we like it. In fact, the children, when some of you have children, you'll find that the children probably more turn to the mother than to turn to the father, okay? And it's only because at the end of the day, the father is mostly working, you know, if it happens to be that way, not all the time. But if it happens to be that way, in my case, it was like that all the time. I was working out, and obviously the children would turn more to Giovanna than me. All right, now if you need to take notes, write this down. Most submissive person in the family has got to be the father. It's got to be the father, deferring everything to the children and to the wife. But that brings us to the second question. What is the principle of submission? Well, there are several principles, but we're only going to focus on two because they are the most important. The first one is known as the principle of reciprocal submission. Reciprocal submission. And the word reciprocal means mutual submission. Okay? So the principle, or at least in the context we're looking at, the principle is that we submit in some way to each other. And it means that God expects every Christian to be submissive to others whenever possible. Write that down. God expects everyone to be submissive to others whenever possible, okay? So if you look at Ephesians chapter 5, and we'll have it on the screen as well, Ephesians chapter 5, verses 21, it tells us how the principle is supposed to work. And it says this, it says, submitting to one another in the fear of God. In other words, the point of being submissive, the first stance for every person in this room is that we submit to everyone, right, as much as we can, all right? And I'll emphasize that, as much as we can, all right? You know that Paul is getting ready to teach on marriage when you look at Ephesians chapter 5, verses 20. Women, pay attention. Men, I told you submission is not what you think it is, so men, pay attention as well. It says submitting to one another in the fear of God. Why do I submit to other people in the fear of God? One of the reasons I think that I've had a very successful career is because I've submitted to the bosses in my job, in terms of management. And the reasons why I'm always picked to go up in rank in the jobs is because I am a hard worker. And I've been submissive to what they've asked me to do, and I've tried to do it the best as I can. And it pays off, as it does in your own marriage. It pays off, you see. So even to this very day, I'm asked to do certain things, which I'm really surprised about, where people want me to sit on boards of directors and all sorts of things. But that is submitting wherever you can, till you come to a line and draw a line, and it challenges your Christian beliefs. So I want you to notice the phrase says to one another, okay? Doesn't distinguish between adults, it doesn't distinguish between children, it doesn't distinguish between male or female or clergy or layman. In fact, Paul didn't make any exceptions on this list or any stipulations. Paul just said that Christians should voluntarily defer to others whenever possible, or to say another way, Christians should voluntarily place what they want under what others want. Now that's not very easy to do. That's the word, like I said, is hypothesia. It's hypothesia. Voluntarily place what they want under what others want. Now, the key thing is huge in the terms of servanthood. If you live a life of submission, you live a great family life, right? On the whole, people, right, are not very good at submitting to one another. As you can see, the way the world is these days is not a good world that we live in. It's a very cruel world. It's a very selfish world. But that's not the way Jesus wanted it. And so it's key to understand that. Now, let me give you an example of parents submitting to children. When our kids were little, eating out was very special. And like I said, you know, all they wanted ever to do is go to McDonald's. And you know why they wanted to go to McDonald's? Because they liked the Happy Meal. You know what the Happy Meal is? With the little toy in it. So those who don't have kids, you don't understand yet, but you will do in time, all right? So they don't want to eat the food, they want the toy. Yeah, you know, and you pay so much money for this stupid little toy, you know, and I can't understand this silly little toy. And this little toy is better than any toy that you've ever bought for Christmas, you know, because it's the toy that they want. But See, I submit to them because that's what they want. And tomorrow and on Sunday, a bank holiday, I will be sitting with them. And I know what they want. They want to go to McDonald's, and they want to sit there and they want to get this happy meal and forget about the food. They just want to play with this little toy, this pathetic little toy. So the happy meal because they really like the little toy. So, but as a pair, I deferred to them until I got smart. And then one day I said to them, we can go out for dinner, but we accept McDonald's. So they looked at me, they thought about it, and then they said, okay, we'll go to Burger King instead. All right. Because they know that there's a toy also in Burger King. All right. The pathetic little toy. All right. Okay. But I defer my submission, my responsibility to them. Are you hearing me? All right. Okay. I don't care if they get a little toy. If that's what pleases them, that pleases me. But the point being, as a patriarch of the family, as a good husband, I'm happy to submit to those kind of things. But anyway, let me give you another example of a husband submitting to his wife. At our house, a few years ago, Giovanna wanted a new kitchen. Well, she wanted to replace all the surfaces, all the cupboards and everything, you know. So I thought, that's good. All right, okay, we can do that. And so we decided, so we looked at the colors and everything, and she would ask me my opinion. I said, well, you choose, you know, I'm happy to, whatever you want. You know, I cook in the kitchen. I don't care about what it looks like. I just cook in the kitchen. And then she said, what I don't want is cupboards on the top like this. You know, I said, but aren't we going to put plates? Don't we have to put plates on the top? She says, no, that's not what I want. I just want it empty, and I want some shelves. So I thought, okay, that's fine. You know, I'll defer it to her. That's what she wants. That's her responsibility. But a few years later, she's saying to me, I think we should have some cupboards on the top. You know, okay, so I'm saying, okay, but I did tell you at the time we should have had cupboards on the top. But she says, I know, but now I think we should because we got a lot of stuff, okay? So I deferred it to her, and she's deferred it back to me, all right? So that's how we have. But the greatest person who was the greatest in submitting to anybody was Jesus himself. Like I said, marriage, my first seminar that I ever give is marriage makes you a better Christian, all right? When you are married, right, you become a stronger and a better Christian. Well, you're supposed to become, all right? If you don't, then there's something wrong. Now, Jesus' life was a perfect example of submission. And remember, he is the epitome of what we should be. He is everything we should be. But I also want you to understand that his life was a perfect example of submission. Would you turn with me to, well, if you've got your Bibles, but it's be on the screen anyway, to Mark chapter 10, verses 37. And you will see this. So this Greek word, hupotasio, to come under, to work under, it says this, and this is what it adds. It says, grant us that we may sit. This is two disciples of Jesus talking, okay? And this is what they're saying. This makes me laugh a little bit, but they're saying this. They're saying, grant us that we may sit, one on your right hand and the other on your left hand in your glory. So what they're saying, these two disciples saying, Jesus, we know when you're in glory, right, I'll sit on your right hand and the other one can sit on your left hand. So what they were saying is that we don't want to happen, and let me just read this out in verses 44 to make it very clear. And whoever of you desire to be first shall be a slave. This is what Jesus says. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. And then in verse 37 he says, they replied, who is they? Anyone. He's talking about these two, James and John. So James and John said, they replied, Jesus, when you sit on your glorious throne, he said, when you're there sitting on your glorious throne, I inserted Jesus there was because he says, when I sit on your glorious throne, he said, I want to sit on your left, and the other one says, I want to sit on your right. The oldest sits on the right, the youngest sits on the left. And that's human nature. When you're reigning glory, we want to reign with you. We don't want to reign above you. We don't want to reign, be under you. We want to reign with you, Jesus. Isn't that great? Isn't that great? Isn't that noble? Yeah? No, it's not very noble, is it? Because at the end of the day, Jesus says, look, the greatest person in this world, the greatest Christian in this world is the one that is the most submissive. The person who gives the most. They want us to be in a position, if we want to be in a position of authority under Jesus, they didn't want to be above Jesus. They just wanted to be equal to Jesus. Well, why? Because the Bible tells us how these things happen. So Jesus says, but among you, it will be different. And Jesus makes it very clear why it will be different. Because what he's talking about is the position of authority as a servant. And when they heard that, they must have cringed a little bit. A servant? We have to be a servant? You know? And that word must have come in their minds, conjured up all sorts of thoughts. But whoever wants to be first among you must be the slave of everyone else. And if you want to be first, you've got to be the slave amongst everyone else. I'm not asking you to do anything that I wouldn't do, Jesus said. For even the Son of Man's talking about himself. So Jesus says, for even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others, to give his life as a ransom for many. As you see, serving others, you're submitting to others. Again, that word, hupotasio. That's very a key word to come under. Now, in fact, do you know what makes marriage successful? I'll tell you what makes marriage successful. And I think it's made our marriage successful, me and Giovanna. This isn't about us not going through bumps in the road. We've been through many bumps in the road. But what we've learned is that what makes marriage successful is mutual submission. Okay? When each spouse, both the husband and the wife, place what they want and desires under what their mate wants and desires, and that's what makes marriage successful. So I place everything in terms of what Giovanna wants, all right? Up to a point, obviously, you know, until she feels, you know, she can't make a decision, or she feels a bit nervous about a decision. There are some decisions that I, as a man, as the patriarch of the family, and as a husband, I have to make decisions, because I know that sometimes she's not in the right mindset, and sometimes I have to say, well, this is what we've got to do. When we came to Sheffield, I've said this to you before. We looked at 70 houses. Can you imagine looking at 70 houses? And we could not find the right one. And we were starting in September. I think we were up to the end of July, and we were going to start a job here in Sheffield. Can you imagine 70 houses? We hadn't found the right one. We didn't feel comfortable. And then when we were driving along, there was a piece of paper on the floor. Giovanna saw this house. And this house, we've seen it. It was in Stannington. And cutting a long story short, I offered £50,000 less for this house than it was worth, because there was the bank crash. And the person accepted that offer. You know. Now, Giovanna said to me, I don't like the house, right? But I just felt, this is the house. This is the house. This is the house where we can bring guest speakers in that can stay with us and things like that. And I had to kind of convince her that this was the house. But she wasn't convinced that much. But eventually she went alongside with me. She put her needs above, her own needs, aside, and put my needs in front. So we bought the house, and we needed a lot to do. There needed a lot to be done in the house. We didn't have proper central heating and all sorts of things. But now she loves the house. She's the best house ever, and all this stuff she comes out with now. And I just kind of remind her, just go back, rub it in a little bit, okay? But you see, you don't all you as partners, you never always see the same at the same time. And God may give one or the other revelation, about something. And you think, this is right. I feel right about this, So in Ephesians chapter 5, verses 22, he starts in verse 21. Here's the mutual principle. Everyone should submit to one another, all right? It says, and then in verse 22, this is a really good verse here, in Ephesians 5:22, it says, I'm going to read this out to you. It says, wives, submit yourselves unto your own husband as unto the Lord. Now here's a question. Does Ephesians chapter 5, verse 22, negate the principle of mutual submission? And the answer is very simply no. But it does introduce a second principle. And the second principle of submission is God expects, write this down, God expects everyone to submit to those in authority. All right? God expects that, okay? Whether the principle follows through church, it follows through home, it follows through life, God expects that. In fact, let me give you some fundamental truths from God's work. All right? If you turn with me to 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 2, and I'll prove this to you. Now, notice what it says. Now, a person who is put in charge, in other words, when a person is given a position of authority as a manager, he must be faithful. Okay? Why must he be faithful? Because God is going to hold him accountable. And it's this simple, what you are responsible for is what you are accountable for. All right? So when you are given a role of responsibility, you will be accountable for that responsibility. Now, people think it's so easy, wives, submit to me, right? But it's not. Because whatever I decide to do, whether I defer it back to Giovanna, right, I will be accountable for in heaven. All right? So I want to make sure I make the right decisions, right? The problem today, I think, secondly, we'll never make a person responsible for something without also giving him the authority to fulfill that responsibility. So when you go to work, right, you're giving someone responsibility, but you're also giving them the authority to be accountable for their responsibilities. And it's the same thing as being a man of God and a woman of God. You are responsible, so then you are accountable as well. Look at Romans 13, and we look at verses 1 to 4. And notice what it says. It says, for all authority comes from God. Do you believe that? Those in position of authority have been placed there by God. So those people are placed there by God. Okay, it makes that very, very clear. And it says, so anyone who rebels against the authorities, rebelling against what God has instituted, and they will be punished for it. So there are people in authority that we are to submit to as long as it does not violate the Christian ethics. All right? So listen to this, what else it says here. So it says, and so anyone who rebels against authority, rebelling against what God has instituted, and they will be punished for. So the authorities do not strike fear in people who are doing right, but in those that are doing wrong. Now this is very interesting, right? For example, why have we got police in place? Can you imagine? Police are given authority, right? And they live in authority. But if we did not fear the police, if we drove 80 miles per hour in a 30-mile zone, right, we would carry on driving wrongly all the time. Is that not right? Okay? So there are people that are in place. The judicial system, if we didn't pay our tax, all right? I've just done my tax return. I had to dot every I, cross every T. I'd have to be very, very transparent with all the money that I get in. I have to show the tax man. I fear the tax man, all right? I don't know about you, but I fear the tax man, all right? But fortunately enough, I've got somebody who's a great accountant who does helps me do my taxes for me. But I fear them. I want to get it right, okay? So I declare everything I should be declaring. All right? And then I will pay whatever I have to pay. Give Caesar what is Caesar's. Give God's what is God's. Is that not right? You do it properly, first of all, and God will always reward you. So notice what it says here. Do what is right, and they will honor you. Right? You will be honored. The authorities are God's servants for your good. But if you're doing wrong, you ought to be afraid. For they have the authority to punish you. All right? So when people come back to me and say they've got a speeding ticket or they've done something wrong, well, you should have known that in the first place. They are God's servants sitting for the very purpose of punishing those who do what is wrong. In other words, like the police. The policemen have been given the responsibility to keep the law and order, but with that responsibility comes the authority to arrest the people. Now, if they didn't have the authority to arrest the people or write tickets, they wouldn't be able to fulfill their responsibilities. Is that not right? So what in the world does this have to do with wives submitting to their husbands? Well, if you remember, God holds the husband responsible for spiritual and physical welfare of his family. With the responsibility comes authority. Are you hearing me, men? All right, okay? And I'll give you an example. If you turn with me to 1 Timothy chapter 5, verses 8, and it says this, "But if anyone does not provide for his own," referring to his family, it says this, and notice that this is written in the masculine, all right? In the Greek, and original learn, it's written in the Greek. So, especially for those of his household, not her household, it's not saying her household, it's saying his household. He's not, she has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. In some Bibles it says infidel. So the man is responsible for the house. Even though the woman may be the breadwinner, that doesn't matter. But he is responsible for the house. Okay? He's responsible for the income, paying the bills, that you don't get yourself in debt and those kind of things. It doesn't matter who's earning the money. At the end of the day, he's responsible. So in God's plan, the husband financially is responsible for providing his family. And when I do a seminar, next year I'm doing a whole thing on finance because people have prodded me to do a teaching on biblical finance. I'm going to do that. You will find, therefore, when it comes to the finance, he has the final authority and the final say. Now, do you want to know what upsets women more than anything else when it comes to submission to men? It's the fact that most men refuse to take responsibility, but they want authority. Oh, I think the women came out there stronger than the men. All right? Okay. I'll say it again just to get a bit better response. It's the fact that most men refuse to take responsibility, but they want authority. All right? You have to take the responsibility and you have to take the authority. If you want authority, you have to have the responsibility as well. So let me give you an example. I'm a big picture guy. I think of the future. With this church, I have big vision. I'm a big future guy. I believe in things in a big and great and wonderful way. Giovanna is more of a detailed woman. She'd be pleased to do things the same every day, all right? But me, right, I get bored. I get bored very quickly, okay? If I've learned one instrument, I want to learn another thing, all right? If there's something to do that I can learn or increase in something, that's what I want to do. I want to go to a lot of countries around the world, There was a time when Giovanna wouldn't want to go abroad. Now she loves it because I go abroad. We both go abroad now. Those kind of things. But I'm a much bigger picture than she. She's an everyday kind of person. She likes to do things every day. And she would do things every day the same. She would sit on the settee. She would do those things. But I have to get up. I have to do something. All right? I'm always doing something. I'm always reading. I'm always learning. I'm always studying. I study a lot. Endless study. More than I've ever done in my PhD because of the things I have to do. But that's the kind of person I am. We are two different types of people. And there's always something that comes up that's different. But I'm a bigger picture kind of person. So in that kind of responsibility that I have, in our early days of our marriage, and I can remember this, in our early days of marriage, I delegated the financial responsibility to Giovanna. And the reason why is because she was good at the small things. All right, so she would do she would pay the bills. She would make sure that we were okay. I would earn the money because I was just the highest breadwinner. But sometimes I would say to her, "Oh, right, okay, let's go out on Friday and let's go out and eat and let's do something like this." And she would say, "No." But I thought to myself, God, I've been working all week. I've earned the money. I'm bringing the cash, And I said, let's go out. Let's go out on Friday. Let's do something. She said, no. And I said, why not? She said, because we don't have the money. Now, I've delegated that responsibility to her. And so if I've given her the responsibility, I've also given her the accountability. And so she's looking out, not just for herself, but for the family. And she's saying, no, we can't afford it. But maybe at the end of the month, I'm able to put some money away, a little bit away, and then we can go out. So because I've given her that responsibility, I have to respect that responsibility. Are you hearing me? All right? Okay? So I can't go against what I've given her. Otherwise, things will blow up or something like that. So all of a sudden, I realize that she's responsible for the finance day to day, and therefore she has the authority. And if she tells me no, I have to say, okay, that's fine. I would sulk a little bit, but and go into my closet a little bit and all that kind of stuff. But then I would come out, okay, this is good. It's her responsibility. And now in our time, we had barely £50, at the end of the month, left, in my time, until things got a little bit much better. And we couldn't afford everything that people can afford these days. Young people now, they have to make sure they have a 10-bedroom house and 10 bathrooms, and I'm exaggerating, all right, a little bit here, but they have to make sure they have everything before they have a child. We didn't care about things like that. You just had a child. That's it. And you just coped with it. We had 2 children. We had a 1-bedroom flat. We were okay with that. But young people say, oh, no, we just got to wait. We just got to wait, And I was 22. Yeah, 22, yeah. But you see, God works these things through. You don't worry about those things. Anyway, that's another seminar, all right? Okay, go to Ephesians chapter 6, verses 1. It says this, children, obey your parents and the Lord, for this is right. Why? Because God has given parents certain responsibilities in regards to their children. And with that responsibility comes authority. That's why we say, as long as you're living under my roof, has anybody ever said that? You do what I say. Okay, have you heard your parents say that? I say that I used to say that to my children. My son wasn't very good when he was in his 20s. He would come to our house. He would be intoxicated. And one day I decided to take him, get a flat, because he would go from job to job. He didn't understand responsibility. I paid all his debts off and said, now you're staying here. I was a cruel father, you see. And I said, because now you have to pay your own bills, all right? He didn't jump from job to job after that, okay? You notice, sometimes you have to push, and now he's the best father ever. I mean, he's a great parent. He's an amazing guy, so, and I'm very proud of him, proud of my son and daughter as well. But you see, we were in a situation where when you're under my roof, in fact, biblically, right, as if you continue paying your children's fees and all things, they're still technically a child. Did you know that? That's biblically. I've taught on this before. But they're technically still a child until you stop paying anything. And then they become an adult. But some of you are thinking, oh my gosh, my mum and dad are still paying for me, and that kind of stuff. I'm not talking about giving gifts. I'm just talking about technically paying for things. All right. So God expects everyone to submit to those in authority. God expects everyone to submit to those that are responsible. Now, whenever you know which principle to use in a particular situation, do I submit to them or do they submit to me? Do I submit to my wife or does she submit to me? How do I know what's right and what isn't right in the case of mutual submission, or is in this case of submission to authority? But so when you don't know what to do, you use the submission test. Anybody heard of the submission test? All right, I'm going to explain a little bit about the submission test. In essence, the submission test determines whether you should submit to others or whether you should submit or they should submit to you. And it applies everywhere. It applies in your home, it applies at your church, and it applies in the workplace. And it's a very simple test that consists of one question. Do you know what that question is? If you're taking notes, write this question down. Right? Does God hold me responsible for this? Okay? Does God hold me responsible for this? Because if you are to make a decision for your wife, for your family, right? You have to ask yourself that question: does God hold me responsible for this? Does God hold me? Now, let me give you some examples to illustrate this how this test works. Jovan and I wanted to sell our house and move to Sheffield. And in the process, when we did sell our house, right, I wanted at least 3-4 bedrooms. And the reasons why, because my children were left in London, and also I wanted to invite guest speakers. It's brilliant to have guest speakers come to your house and stay in your house, because they will tell you everything about your house. And it brings an anointing to the house. I love that. It's a lovely feeling, you know, when people come. And in the early days, that's what we did, you know. And it was a hard work because we cooked, we washed and all this stuff, you know. Now we put them in a hotel because we're a bit older, and it's harder work now. But we still go and see them. We still pay a lot of time with them. But if you turn with me to Paul, Ephesians chapter 5, verses 2. It says, his wives should submit to their husbands as unto the Lord. So Paul also said that we should submit to one another whenever possible. All right? So in chapter 5, verses 21 and 22, they come together, okay? Submitting yourself to one another in the fear of God. Wives, submit yourself unto your own husband as unto the Lord. So you've got the principle of mutual submission in verses 21. Look at that. And then you've got the principle of submission to the authority in verses 22. So which principle applies to a situation? That's the key. What applies to this situation will determine that I use the submission test. So I simply ask myself, does God hold me responsible for the style of home that I live in, for example? All right? Okay? Now, am I to receive a greater reward on the type of home, for example, that I am to buy? You know, is it going to be a nice Tudor home? Is it going to be a ranch home or whatever it is? Is God going to hold me? Is it going to be a lovely flat? Is it going to be one bedroom flat? Is God going to hold me responsible? Does God care what style of home that I am going to live in? And the answer to that is no. God doesn't really care. All right? He doesn't care what type of home you live in, all right? Therefore, the principle of mutual submission applies, all right? So I defer to Joanna. Do you like this? I don't know. Do you like that? What don't you like about this? The pros and the cons. And not the principle of submission to the authority. Does that make sense? Remember, a benevolent father and a good husband will be most submissive within a family. And I'm going to explain why in a little bit. And I'm going to show you in a moment. Are you okay with this so far? I have more expensive taste than Giovanna. All right? I mean, I have a more expensive taste. In other words, I have no problem of buying a saxophone. But she has a problem of buying a saxophone. And the reason why I don't have any problem with buying a saxophone. Now, if I wanted to go and buy a saxophone, and I said to her, I want to go and buy a saxophone, right? And she says, no, we can't. Now, saxophones aren't cheap. They range from 1,000 to 2,000 to 4,000 to even higher than that. So if I wanted to buy an alto sax, which I wanted to buy, right, who would be in the right? Would she be in the right or would I be in the right? You see. Now, the question I've got to ask myself is this. I go back to the submission test. And I would say to myself, you know, am I going to put our family in a desperate situation? Am I going to put our family in a financial desperate situation? That's the question I have to ask myself, okay? But I did get the sax, and the reason why I got the sax is because I get pocket money from my wife every month, and I save. And I'm good at saving. I'm brilliant at saving. Okay, so I save. And I don't put a burden on our main finance. I save the bits and pieces that I can, and then when I have the money, I buy it. Do you see what I'm saying? So I can turn around now to my wife. I said, I can buy the sacks. She says, we haven't got the money to buy the sacks. And I said, yes, we have. Because I said, I've saved from your pocket money that you give me every month. And so I can go and buy the sacks. And that's what I do. That's what I've done. I've never had debt, any debts at all. We are mortgage free. We are mortgage free. And I've always been on the principle of not getting myself in debt. Now, I know a lot of people need to pay off or borrow things, but my principle has always been not to borrow, but to pay off everything. And we've always paid off everything. When I was in my early 40s, I went up to Giovanna and said, she says, you got a smile on your face. I said, yes. I said, why? She said, why? I said, because I've paid off the mortgage. And tears came down her eyes, you know, because I aim to pay off the mortgage at a certain age, you know. It's good to have goals, isn't it? Okay? So I asked the question, does God hold me responsible for my family's finance? And the answer is yes. He does hold me. You know, I'm a bigger picture man. So I've always thought about the pension. I've always thought much, you know, of a lot more of the future, what we're going to do when we get to that point of retirement. We can't work anymore. We physically can't work anymore and things like that. I've always been bigger picture. Giovanna hasn't been like that, you know. But I've always had something in place. Always something in place. Turn with me to 1 Timothy chapter 5, verses 8. So I have the authority to say, I'm sorry, but we can't afford that according to God's word. And so she's to submit to my authority, but she still gets to choose the style of house as long as we can afford it, the color of paint. Submitted to one another in the fear of God. So 1 Timothy chapter 5, did I read that out right? Okay, now earlier I said that this benevolent father and good husband will be most submissive within the family as well. So if you're taking notes, write this down. A lot of your marriage conflicts or problems, your fight, could be solved with this. Here is the submission, especially as it's pertaining to mutual submission by the product of love. People don't realize this, but the byproduct of submission is love. Obviously, I love my wife. I love my children. I love my grandchildren. Let's turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4 to 5. Paul is describing love, and the love that he's describing is called an agape love. It's an unconditional love. And the type of love that a father should have for his children and a husband should have for his wife. And Paul tells us some very specific things about love. Notice what he says. Love is patient, love is kind, love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. None of you are like that, are you? No, nobody's saying amen to that. It does not demand its own way. Do you see that the true love does not demand its own way? Now the key thing is true love does not demand its own way. All right? I don't demand my own way with Giovanna. All right? In fact, I think the opposite to her. Giovanna herself would buy clothes from a charity shop. I would never buy clothes from a charity shop. All right? She would kindly do that. But I go and buy her clothes from other shops as well. So I would like her to have what she can have, but not because we can afford it. Not because we can't afford it, because we can afford it. Instead, it allows others to have their way, which is exactly what submission is. Submission is deferring to others. It's allowing them to make a decision or choose what they want. Do you know how Giovanna knows that I love her? She knows because I submit to her will, desire, and wishes, if at all possible. I submit to those wills and possible. I'm a peacemaker in our home. You know, unless it goes over the top or she's thinking completely outside the box of Christ, I will always submit to those kind of things that she's thinking. I said, go ahead, do that, go and buy that. It's okay. I'm happy with that. Unless it comes outside the arena of Christ. And sometimes it does, and then I have to bring her back in and say, we've got to pray about this. This is what God wants us to do. My love for my children and my grandchildren compels me to let them have their way rather than me have my way. In fact, I don't really care much about myself, to be honest with you. If I went to heaven tomorrow, I'd be glad. I think life is so short these days, It's funny, let me give you one example. When we have food day, when we have the food time, isn't it funny how many people pile their plates of food? And I could be looking at some of you here, all right, okay? But isn't it funny, but they don't think about the person who's behind them, right? And they've emptied the dish, but they don't realize, am I making you feel bad? Good. All right? Okay? But they don't think about the person next to them. It's almost like food is running out when we have food day, right? Community day. You can see the piles, right? And, usually those days, I hardly get to eat. You know why? Because the food's gone. Because everybody's talking to me, chatting me, and some people come up to me with their food up this pile and say, Pastor, haven't you eaten? No, because you've got it all. All right? Okay? And this is not putting people down, but listen to me. Why don't we just take a little bit and so the next person can have some more? That's why at the community service, I said, I want those guests to go first. Because I know if the guests didn't go first, they wouldn't get to eat. Yeah. Now, I know I'm joking aside, but can you see that sometimes we look after ourselves and we're not submitting to the others who have come into our church? But that's what God calls us to do. And most times I don't eat because there's no food left. And I've spent 3 days cooking for you guys. Yeah. I cooked 30 chickens last time. All right? And I wanted one of them. I wanted to taste one. They must have been good because they're gone. All right? But you see, the principle is this. That's why the Bible says we submit to one another as much as we can to others, But everybody's scoffing like it's the end of the world. And yet there are many people, thousands of people in impoverished countries that are starving, wouldn't even fill their plates because they know the next child needs to eat as well. That's the Western world. That's the way we think. Now, am I making you feel guilty? Good. Because that's the way we think. This is the way we are in this society today. So love is very, very important. Now, I'm just going to end with a few things here to say this. Is that in John 15:12, it says that this is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Now, Jesus says this, he said, it is my commandment that you love one another as I have loved you. Usually the verse says, love one another as you love yourself. But that's easy, right? Okay? Jesus turns all that around from the Old Testament to the New, and he changes it around. He says, love one another as I have loved you. So Jesus said, this is what I would wash your feet. I would give you my food. I would help you in certain situations. He says, if you're going to love one another as I have loved you. Not as you love yourself, because if you love yourself, you would want to do everything for yourself. So submission comes in, it's not about yourself, because most marriages break up, one, because of finance. Most counseling I've done is because the husband just spends everything, or the wife spends everything, doesn't think of the other person's feelings or anything, puts them all into debt, and then there is a strain on their marriage. But the key thing is this, is that marriage is there for two people to be submissive to each other. And when he talks about a command, he's actually talking about a law. In the situation of a law, this is my command that you love one another as I have loved you. And I go back to Jesus. In Matthew 26, verses 30, when Jesus was about to face the cross. When he was just about to face the cross, in other words, he said, God, if there's any way to say, don't make me do that. Who would want to go and die on a cross? Nobody. Who would want to go on a cross willingly? Nobody. And even Jesus said, if you can sort some other way, God, to his Father, he says, if you can do any other way, Please try another way. But that was true love. You see, that was what Jesus did. That was true submission from Jesus Christ. It's about loving others the way Christ loved us by placing their needs and wants and desires above our own. Remember, true love does not demand its own way. And that's why I say mutual submission should be a natural response for Christians. It should be naturally coming to us. As a Christian father, and as a Christian husband, and as a Christian friend, I should fulfill the law of Christ, which is to love others the way he loved us. And we do that by putting other needs first and not putting our needs first.